the video started, so now everyone can talk. Yes, we do have 10. Yeah, this I think I said it last week, but the vart, one of the any vart that you say, I guess the more you're connected to it, the more excited you are about it. So I'm very excited about this vart in particular. But I wanted to preface with a story, and that was a true story. That a couple of years ago I was shopping at Nordstrom Rack, and all of a sudden a guy, I never met him in my life, non-religious, not even Jewish person, came over to me. We're by the tie section, so the tie section's on like a low table with a bunch of ties, and he puts on the table, he puts down a green pair of pants and an orange shirt. Like, he picked out these two articles of clothing, and he's like to me with the straightest face I've ever seen, he's like, "Excuse me, sir, does this look like a carrot?" So I was gonna laugh at him, because honestly I thought it looked like a carrot, but then it occurred to me, I'm actually, like, he's asking me a serious question, so I'm gonna give him a serious answer. And I realized that a carrot is green on top and orange on bottom, and here his shirt, which was on top, was orange, and the green pants were on bottom. So I told him, no, it doesn't really look like a carrot. You're in good luck, because it's really like, I guess you call it an upside down carrot. All he needed was a beige pair of shoes, and it would be like hummus with carrots. But anyways, so I thought that was interesting, because he was trying to identify. He was curious. Did it look like a carrot? He was curious. It was this perspective. Some people might view, hey, yeah, it does look like a carrot. Others may like, no, it's just orange shirt and green pants. So one of the ideas there's a lot of avenues you can go when you start mentioning and talking about perspective. But one of them is humility. And that's the discussion here, and this is the perfect Parsha to discuss it, because in chapter Yud Beis, Pasuk Beis, in this week's Parsha, Parshas Bo, the Torah introduces to us, you can call it the mitzvah of time, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadashim, the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. And we know in the Jewish people, a slave doesn't have time. A slave is not bound by time. A slave just has a master, and whatever he says, you do. But when a free person has time management, a free person has control over time. Right. One of the things we know, when Moshe came to Paro and said, "Hey, free the Jews," Paro said, "Hey, like, why are you interrupting them from their work? Why don't interrupt them?" Because Paro realized, if they're interrupted from their work, they'll come to the idea on their own to think about, hey, why don't we be free? But if someone else is controlling your time, and you don't have time to think, no pun intended, but you don't have time to think about that, then you just get lost in the process. You get lost in the work. So Rosh Chodesh introduces to us this notion of time. And I quoted number 2, which is the very last pasuk of Perek Yud Beis. It's 51 psukim long. It's quite large. So it starts off with the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh and ends with the Exodus, Yitzias Mitzrayim. Vayhi be'etzem hayom hazeh hotzi Hashem es bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al tzvosam. So there's clearly obviously the fact that the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, and there's 20 mitzvahs in this week's parsha, but the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh is in the parsha of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And it's the bookend of it is set up like that as well. It's Rosh Chodesh, and at the end it talks about, it was on that day God took the Jews out of Egypt. So,
excuse me. So are you saying that in that we didn't have violence over our own time because we were slaves? So then, introducing the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh to us by Hashem, that's a type of freedom? Is that what you mean? Like having time is a type of freedom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that freedom really manifested itself once we were freed from Egypt. That's when we were able to have that bilos over the Zman, over the time. So this is fascinating. So if you look at number 3, we're quoting here from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis, which goes into Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, which is in number 5. You'll see it. But the Mishnah says, Sanhedrin haisa kechatzi goran agula k'dei roan ze'ezeh. Sanhedrin sat in a semicircle. Okay, remember those words, or one word, it's a compound word, whatever it is. Remember the semicircle. They sat in this chetzi goran agula. Why? So that that way they can see one another. This is an astounding Rashi. If you look at number 4, what's pshat that they sat in a semicircle? Rashi says, "Ba'agula hayu yoshvin." They sat in a circle. It's really a semicircle. Kedei shehu kulan royin ze'ezeh, so that each member of the Sanhedrin should see one another. And again, the connection between Sanhedrin and Rosh Chodesh is because when the Eidim would come in, the Rosh Chodesh, it was the Sanhedrin who would then proclaim it Rosh Chodesh. That's the connection. So. So Rashi says, "Lefisha imahayu yoshvin b'shura." If they sat in one long line, ein pnei harishonim roan ze'ezeh. Right, the two people at the bookends, they're far apart. They're not going to be able to see each other. So you can't have them sit in a row. Uvagula shalema. You can't have them sit in a full circle. Ein yoshvin lefisha tzrichin bali hadin va'edim likane sadavar b'fnei kulam. What's going to happen? The bali dinim, the edim are going to come in, and what? They're going to stand in the center. That means they're going to be facing towards some of them, and their backs are going to be towards others. And when it comes, Rashi says you'd have to be medaktek b'devarim when it comes to listening to the edim, when it comes to listening to the bali dinim, and part of being medaktik b'dvarim is not just the words they say, but it's the way they say it. It's body language and all that. And if you're behind somebody, you're not going to get that same experience. You're not going to be able to get that same testimony. So it had to be that they sat in a semicircle. That way, each member of the Sanhedrin can see one another, and that way they could see the Balei Dinim and the Eidim. But on the just to focus on the fact that these words are just to focus on these words, Kulan Royan Ze'ezeh. They sat in a semicircle so that every member of Sanhedrin should see one another. So it's interesting. There's a very strong connection between Rosh Chodesh and Achdus, right? And we know that ultimate Geula comes, right? If the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam, then hopefully it will be rebuilt with the opposite, Avas Chinam. So Achdus and Geula go hand in hand. So it's not a coincidence that Rosh Chodesh, the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh begins and then ends with Yetzias Mitzrayim, because Rosh Chodesh is this idea of hischadshus, of renewal, and it has to do with time, with our relationship with Hashem, but also has to do with our relationship with other people. There's not many times of the month, there's only one time of the month that we actively, right, we say Shalom Aleichem we say it on Shabbos, but where there's this real minhag to say Shalom Aleichem to somebody 3 times, right? And that's when we bench that's right after Rosh Chodesh, when we bench the Chodesh, we say Shalom Aleichem. I have a bit of litanus I do whenever someone says Shalom Aleichem, I say Aleichem Shalom, I say, oh, Yisrael, nice to meet you, and we start a whole conversation. It's a little litanus, right? But it's a time to be together. It's a time of hischadshus, not just in our avodas Hashem from a man to God relationship, but also to man relationship. And that stems partly from this idea that Sanhedrin was sat at a semicircle. That way they should see one another. And I was thinking, if you look at the simple meaning of Rosh Chodesh means Rosh Chodesh means Rosh Chodesh, a new head. And it's this idea that every single member of Klal Yisrael, why were they Royan Ze'ezeh? Because every member of the Sanhedrin had a thought, had an opinion, had their own perspective on the situation and how to deal with whatever was in front of them. And it was important enough that they sat in a semicircle, that way they see and perceive every single person's perception and their view on things, because everybody's different. Rosh Chodesh literally means a new head, and everybody has a Rosh Chodesh. Everybody has their own mindsets, their own way of thinking, their own way of looking at the world. And part of the idea of saying Shalom Aleichem to people that you've never met is to realize, hey, you have a Rosh Chodesh, you think differently than me, you dress differently than me, you look differently than me, but I still respect you for that. We're still all part of God's Klal Yisrael. And again, it starts with the Rosh Chodesh, and ultimately, what's the ending? Because when there's this idea where you see the Rosh Chodesh, you see that everybody has a unique perspective. When we obviously we're not sitting like a half circle, but when we symbolically copy Sanhedrin and sit in a semicircle, that way we see one another, we see where you're coming from and where you're coming from. That ultimately leads to Geula. So the Gemara says, Minani Mili. How do we know that they would sit in a semicircle? Amar Acha Bar Chanina Damar Kra. It says in the pasuk in Shir, I don't know how to say it exactly. Sharicha, something like that. Sharicha Agan Hasar. So we're not going to read the all of it, but literally translated, your navel is like a moon-shaped basin. Okay, says the Gemara, Shirecha Zu Sanhedrin. That refers to Sanhedrin. Lama Nikra Shema Shirecha. Why are they compared to the navel, to the belly button? Shehi Yosheves B'Tibur Sha'olam. Just like the navel sits at the center of the human body, so too Sanhedrin sat at the Tibur Sha'olam. What's the navel of the world? What's the center of the world? Well, it was really Yerushalayim, and in that is the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash is called Tiburo Shel Olam. Agan, what does it mean, the Agan, which is talking about this basin? What does a container, a basin do? It protects, like Magen, that's the same word. Shehi Megina al Kala Olam Kula, because Sanhedrin, it offered a certain level of protection. And what's a third idea here? Hasar. We know that Hasar is the moon, Shehi Daima Lisar, because they were shaped, the Sanhedrin sat in a semicircle just like the moon. Very interesting. If you look at number 6, the Ben Yoyada says, Yosheves B'Tiburo Shel Olam. They sat at the navel, at the belly button, at the center of the world. And he says something fascinating. I just found this a few minutes before I came here. Ki Tevas Olam. The word Olam is written chaser. Vav. It's written without the Vav. So it's spelled Ayin, Lamed, Mem. Ksiv, that's how it's written. Olam Ksiv, sorry. V'im Timali Osios Olam Kazev. You fill out the letters. So Ayin is spelled Ayin Yud Nun. Lamed is spelled Lamed, Mem Daled. Mem is spelled Mem, Mem. And it's quoted over here. Ayin, Lamed, Mem. What's the exact center? Well, if you have 3 on one side and 3 on one side, the exact center, there's 2 letters, and that's Lamed and Mem. Timtza Osios Lamed Mem. Omdim be'emtza. The letters Lamed Mem stand in the middle. Shehu b'tibor shel tevas olam. Right? It's the navel, it's the belly button, it's the tibor of the word olam is Lamed Mem, which is Gematria 70, which is an allusion to the Sanhedrin, which was 70 members. I never heard that before. I thought that was fascinating. If you look at number 7, the Marsha, and this is where it's going to get crazy, because this is a perspective of the Exodus that's I haven't found discussed too often, but I think there might be some real basis to it. So if you look in the Marsha is also on that Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Marsha says, "V'amarshi daimel sahar." Sanhedrin sat they were shaped like a moon. Well, wait, I don't understand. Take a step back for a second. What shape is a moon, right? If you look at the DreamWorks logo, right? So we know that's a half logo with a guy on right, with a fishing rod. So that's not. Maybe that's what it's talking about, or maybe sometimes it's a full moon. Which one is it? So, well, we just said it's talking about a semicircle. So that's one stage of the moon. Says the Marsha, "Eini gula shalvan shal harov." Sorry, shal harov. Most of the time, "Eini gula shalvan shalom." The circleness, the shape of the moon is not full. Rak chatzi igol. Rather, it is a semicircle. V'chein yoshvin Sanhedrin, and that is how Sanhedrin sat. Sanhedrin sat how the moon mostly sits. Masha'en kein achav, in contrast to the sun, which always shehila olam igulu shalom, which is always a circle. So this is where it's going to get crazy, because people often think, oh, the Jewish people, right? The culmination of the Exodus of Yetzias Mitzrayim, we didn't really get free until the Egyptians died at Kriyas Yamsuf. And so we often think of, they crossed the sea. And, okay, so how do you cross the sea? You go from point A to point B, across. So if this is the water, you go from here to there. But it's clear from the Meforshim that's not what they did, because they didn't have to go across the sea. They just had to go in and out. That way the Egyptians could follow after them, and then subsequently drown. Says the... Well, the Torah says in next week's Parsha, "B'shalach vayavou b'nei Yisrael b'toch hayam bayabasha." They went in the water on the dry land. V'hamayim lehem chayma. The water was a wall for them. Mimimnam umismalam, on their right and on their left. The Chizkuni on that pasuk says. You don't have to read the whole thing, but I bolded the crucial point. He says these words: "V'nichnesu bo b'chatzi igol." They entered into it b'chatzi igol. It was a semicircle. They didn't go across the Yam Suf. They went like this. They went like a semicircle, and they came out the same side. And the advantage of that was, well, they went in the water, and the Egyptians followed suit and ultimately drowned. But you see this idea that the ultimate geula of the Exodus really was at this moment, right? And how did that come about? They entered it in the shape of the moon, bechatzi eagle, the same exact way the Marsha explained chatzi eagle, the same way Rashi and the Sanhedrin explained that they sat like a chatzi eagle, like a semicircle. It was the shape of a moon. So it's almost like Hashem is. There's some symbolism over here. The way that we ultimately got freed was after we were shaped like the moon. We crossed it like the shape of a moon. And we know the moon is called the Or HaKatan, which is the small light. Even though it provides so much, but a moon by definition doesn't have a light of its own. It reflects the light of the sun. And it's called small because the moon represents humility. The moon, the fact that there's something bigger than us, there's something greater, and the light is not necessarily my own, I'm merely reflecting it. That's one of the symbolisms of the Jewish people, because we reflect the light of God, the light of the Torah. It's not us ourselves, it's us in our connection with Hashem, and that's part of humility. Not everyone knows, but the word humility, the Latin word is hum, which is like low, hum, right? And the Mediterranean cuisine is hummus, right? So I'm not sure what the connection with that is, but humus, spelled not with two M's, but Humus. Humus is like the fertilizer in the ground, like the dead leaves and stuff, that ultimately from that sprouts growth and helps trees grow. And also human, the word human starts with that. And we know human is Adam, and Adam is Adama, from the ground, and human, humus, which is the ground. And these are all connected because, yeah, we're humble. We realize that we come from we're going to be going to the ground where it gives us a sense of humility. At the same time, we realize that same Adama, that same ground, we still realize you changed around. It's Adama. We're like God. So part of humility is realizing that Hashem is the one who's the provider, and we're his vessel, and we're carrying suit. So I really just want to end off with this Sefer Osios, from the Sefer Osios Rabbi Akiva. He says the following: Kol mi sheyesh lo anava v'shiflos, anyone who has the midah, the trait of humility, Hashem will lift him up and make him great. She'ein lecha midah tova ba'olam kanava. It's a strong statement. He says there is no better attribute, there's no better characteristic, there's no better trait in the world like anava, like humility. And perhaps, what Hashem's trying to tell us with the fact that the way we left Mitzrayim, with like the shape of the moon, Kechatz Eagle, is reminding us of this idea. Is remember, you're on top of the world right now. You literally just escaped the most unescapable place on planet Earth. No one ever did it. You're the first nation to do it. But realize where it came from. Realize you have to be humble, right? I always thought it was interesting that Noah, when he landed his teva, it was specifically on a mountain. Why didn't Hashem make him land on a flat plain? And it's because maybe the idea is that Noah, he was the one person, part of his family, the one man saved from the whole world. That could give a person a sense of gaiva, a sense of haughtiness. So the very first task that he had to do was walk down a mountain. And it's a mountain represents, so to speak, it could be gaiva, so you walk down the mountain. The very first, that was the way to build the world once again, starting fresh, starting anew, was with this midah that the Sefer Osios Rabbi Akiva says is the midah tova ba'olam, which is anava.
Yeah, shkala.
Shkala.
Okay,
That's very nice. Mashallah.
Shkala.
Shakor. Now, you may reveal some new revelations here, which I was not aware of.
Yeah.
You mentioned to me, now let me see if I get this correct, because this is, whenever we read the story, and of course I'm reflecting on the Ten Commandments movie we talked about last week.
Yeah, I haven't seen it since you mentioned it last week.
Well, no, actually, this a little bit boggles my mind now. When they said in the Sefer Torah, people across the Red Sea and all that, literally, to me, I'm more of a literalist, you have to understand. Literally means was a different shore, so we're leaving Mitzrayim going into what was then Canaan. So they were going directly across the sea. So you mean to tell me that they came? I'm boggled. My mind doesn't quite.
That's what he's saying, right? That they came out on the same side.
They waddled in the water somewhere, and then came back right into Mitzrayim. basically, because we're trying to.
Well, they were already out of Mitzrayim, right? They were
Oh,
already out of
Mitzrayim,
Mitzrayim
I'm
at
sure.
that point.
And I wish I had a map here, but
There were 7
Yeah.
days out.
Right. Exodus happened. That was the first days of Pesach. 7 days later, we read about the Kriyas Yam Suf. They already had traveled
Well,
a certain distance.
I'm a little bit confused. So they didn't even. So then, what was the?
What was the point?
No, I understand. No, they needed to go in the water. Go.
To get the Egyptians.
Yeah, right. I understand that, but they never went to the other side. This is the first time I'm hearing this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's fascinating. It's a perspective.
That's
we
why I
don't
said
know
the
from
new
here.
revelation here. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what I was, you know.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll have more to ask.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
go along. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it's also interesting to note that the waters are controlled by the moon.
Oh,
Mm.
right. Like,
It's like another layer of protection or guidance,
right.
or like another nail in this coffin. This is the point, like trying to bring the point more to home that we do the moon, the same circle, all this, and it's also controlled by the moon.
And Yosef's coffin wasn't.
I was with them.
You know about Kriyas Yam Suf, no?
Was
So
it?
you mentioned the nail in the
Yeah,
coffin.
yeah. I just kind of tried to point home, and now for some reason. I was like,
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Interesting.
A little bit of Harchavas HaDevarim on one of your points.
Yeah.
So the Chachamim say that there were 12 pathways through the Yam Suf. Each Sheva went through their own path. And Rashi says that the water was clear, so you could see through one the other.
Mm.
And Rashi says the reason that they could see through is because they'd be worried about each other. They're all in different pathways, so Sheva Reuven's going through their path. So they're wondering, they got friends, and Sheva Shimon, I wonder if they're okay, like I can't see anybody. So Hashem made the water transparent so everybody could see each other, and we wouldn't be worried. It's like a chesed from Hashem. So I had an additional idea on that when people are going through a path, they tend to think that this is the only path.
Mm.
So Sheva Reuven's going through, it's like, yeah, I'm on the right path. I'm going through the Yam Suf. What's going on with Shimon and Levi? Maybe they're not on the right derech. So Hashem lets every Shevet see that every other Shevet has a path through the Yam Suf. Everybody's derech is a valid derech, obviously within the Torah. And you have to see that, otherwise you get tunnel vision. You start to think that only your path is the right path. So I was thinking of that relative to what you said here, that the concept of the half circles, that's a rowing Elam. And so therefore it confirms that when they're all going through the Yam Suf, that they have to be in that form where you can see each other. We're all in this together, no one's above anybody else.
Wow, fascinating.
Sure.
Shkaya.
Quote your Rebbe, I think, when Rebbe Torah used to say that at Emes is an area, not a point.
Yes.
And I think that ties into
Is an area, not a point.
many drachim that are all Emes.
One other thing that I didn't hear you bring this out, but it's taken face value. This actually with Chodesh is a women's chag, really. Well, we do Dominics, the tefillahs and Hallel and Hatzah Hallel and everything, but the women really take this literally in a sense. There's some work they don't do on Rosh Chodesh.
Right.
You know that, but they did not participate in the Golden Egel and everything else. So that's something we need to point out. I'm not going to say specifically it's a holiday for all, but the men and women look at it differently or observe it differently.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Shkaya. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much.
Can I keep this?
Yeah, sure, please.
That's kinda-
Here's the AC